Welcome back. I hope you have enjoyed your break. I think I'll just spend a short 2 minutes introducing the speakers, who they are, and we sort of had a conspiracy. We decided because we all suffer from low back pain, so we're gonna sit here. And I'm gonna stand up there, and so we'll be more casual about it. Michael Spence, whom you already know and has been introduced, is world authority on economic development and globalization, and he's, I'm not going to introduce him more. Everybody knows that he co-chairs the academic board of the AGI. Thank you, Michael. Next, we have Mr. William Fung, who, unlike most of us, actually makes a living selling things, right? We sell ideas, you know, Michael and I, we sell ideas, which means we lie most of the time, but he is honest. He really sells goods and has to deliver. He leads Li and Fung, has been very active in not only in business operating a world-class company in global supply chains, and it's a very old company that has been completely brought up to date. And he also spends a lot of time interested in university academic development, and until recently chaired the business school at the University of Science and Technology on the other side of the harbor. Finally, may I introduce Oki Matsumoto, who deals with things that we have all heard of but know nothing about, and that's called cryptocurrency, fintech. It's all very important, except that, and we talk a great deal about it, but none of us understand why prices go up and down. I am delighted to know that Mr. Matsumoto, who is stationed in Japan, in Tokyo, who founded this company called Monex and had been working previously at Salomon Brothers and Goldman Sachs. I'm really glad to know that he just confessed that he didn't know why when the prices dropped 10% very recently. so we are in good company. I'm Richard Wong. I'm a professor of economics here at the University of Hong Kong. So welcome back to this session. So let's start. Now, we have all heard Michael spoke today, so we're gonna punish him by not asking him to say first. Right, so may I move very quickly to William, as a practical businessman. How does the trade war, the so-called trade war that the U.S. and China is bringing to the fore in news every day, how does this relate to, you think, to the people on the ground in terms of for business to readapt, to readjust, and what does this mean to workers in different parts of the world, particularly in Asia? I'd like you to think a little bit about it. This is an important subject that all of us see on the headlines every day. If we don't see it, we get a Twitter from someone who reminds us this is the #1 priority. And then I would like to talk a little bit after that people would join in, and then I think it will gradually move to the new economy, and maybe, okay, you can dive in a little later, but I think we start with an economy that we're more familiar with, and maybe would you say a few words, William?
Yes, thank you very much, Richard, for that very kind introduction. Well, let me just first say that my claim to fame was that Mike and I went to the same undergraduate college together. Of course, he went on to loftier heights, PhD at Harvard, and then Nobel Laureate. I unfortunately went to the business school, and that's why you said that I'm the guy on the ground and with a micro view, and here's the macro view. So perhaps what I'd like to do is to share with everyone some of my perspective as really a practitioner. Somebody whose firm, and which I worked for my whole life, has benefited tremendously from the globalization and the multilateral system that was extant in the last 20, 30, 40 years, and who are also right in the front line now of this trade war. Obviously, the business that we're in is bearing the brunt, of this conflict, confrontation between our biggest supplier in the world, which is China, and our biggest market, which is the United States at the moment. So perhaps I'd just like to share some perspectives with you on that. First of all, let me just say that we keep calling it a trade war, and my view is it has nothing to do with trade. Okay, and I'll tell you why that's true. Of course, and I hope Mike will back me up with this from an economic theory point of view. Okay, there should be, in this globalized world, no such thing as bilateral trade balances, which was the pretext under which the President of the United States says that we have to do something about. The idea of bilateral trade balances, if you go to the classic, Ricardo theories of comparative advantage and everything's happened in between, really has no place in the modern world. You cannot have bilateral trade balances. Okay, it's because of the savings rate, because of the consumption rate, and so on, which I won't go into, because that's the economist's view. Okay, as far as we're concerned, okay, another telltale sign that this is not about trade is that the U.S. President Donald Trump, invoked his powers to impose this punitive tariff on Chinese exports via something called Section 301, which has something to do with national security, not about economic trade imbalances. It was invoked on the basis that somehow this trade imbalance, as he terms it, okay, imperils or impacts upon national security. And I think the previous speakers, including Mike, have already talked about that. It really is, the trade was the pretext, and then it goes much deeper. Well, then, is it about economics? And I would say that yes, somewhat about economics, but it doesn't make sense either. And I'll tell you why. And Larry Lau, who was here earlier, I'm a great fan of his. I read all his stuff. And he's basically saying that, look, the simple premise that people hear, and we business people are simple people. I think an intellectual businessman is somebody who reads The Economist and the FT and nothing else. So everything else that everybody here publishes, we don't have access to. But basically, the reason is that the reason, remember the president said that we're going to a war because it's unfair. China ships more to us than we ship to them. $500 billion of trade from China to the US, $150 billion of shipments from America to China. So obviously, it's an imbalance. Not only that, he says that because China is so big in trade compared to our trade with them, that we're going to win this war, but it's going to hurt China a lot more if we impede or stop this trade. Well, the reality is that for those of you who remember your Economics 101, okay, the impact of trade on GDP numbers, on the value of the economy, is X minus M, exports minus imports. So it's the value add that's what's impacting the economy. Okay, China's exports to America at best is 15-20% value add. The rest are components from all over Asia and other places, all the raw materials that go in. China basically adds labor. Okay, and let's say it's 15%, which is high. Okay, that $500 billion translates into about $150 billion of value to the economy. And very simplistically speaking, the American $150 billion, a lot of it is things like soybeans, cotton, and so on. And let's say that's almost 100% American. So actually, the trade that benefits the economy, if trade is impeded or stopped, I think the impact's about the same. So the economic argument really doesn't hold a lot of water. I think what really come down to is then really what everybody else here today focused on, which is really about political dominance, is maybe even about ideology. And that's the problem, is that us poor business people getting caught in between, okay, is basically now suffering. It's actually what I would consider a political and ideological struggle between what I would call the Western model and the Eastern or Chinese model of how to bring well-being, to people. And we've heard many times now from many speakers that, ultimately you're talking about which system delivers better economic value to the people that they're serving. And you've heard that, under the globalization, the model that we've had before, which is basically free market-based, and then backed by sort of Western democratic and liberal ideals, okay, is better for people in general. And then we have an opposing view, that no, there are excesses that needs to be limited in the free market system that is not controlled properly. and maybe the system of controlling it has to be more authoritarian and less democratic because of the speed with which change has to take place. You know, I work in both systems, and I could see the value of both. I really do. The problem that I have, and I'd like to bring up one thing that perhaps we can discuss, is that unfortunately, okay, for the Western system, I would say, okay, there's one word I want to put in everybody's mind, and that is everything now is moving at great speed. And the idea of having free markets controlled by regulations seems to be moving too slowly to control the market properly. That is what has happened, I think, in many instances, including the financial crisis. You know, it's almost like the horse, what is the term? The horse is bolted and you're closing the gates. See, the free market, the Western free market system, which I'm well familiar with, I studied in the States, I went to business school in the States, I'm well familiar with the system, is basically saying that the government's going to put regulation around the arena, and within the arena, you basically do what you want. There's a free market. So the laws are there, the regulations are there. But what if the world is changing so rapidly because of technology and because of other things, okay, that the regulations and the laws cannot keep up with the speed of change? Okay, and then I was obviously I know something about the Chinese system, the prevalence of SOEs. I know also a little bit about the Singapore system, you know, the Temaseks of this world, and how they are participating in the economy. So there's another school of thought that says that, yes, regulation, the world's changing too quickly, regulation is not fast enough, and therefore I need to participate in the economy in order to control and not let do harm to the community and the society is operating in. So I think that, for me, is actually the difference. And it's not communism, capitalism, I think, you know, where these are all 18th, 19th century ideas, but it's really about how you prevent the excesses of capitalism. And I think we all agree there are winners and losers. You know, in this it's the Darwinian, you know, free market idea of, you know, the strong get stronger, the weak basically have to do something else. Versus, you know, the idea of, you know, at what point, you know, is the society coming beforehand, and therefore I want to keep harmony in the society, and you cannot just have rampant mercantilism, you know. So for me, that's the problem, and unfortunately, that's now going to loom, I think, into a protracted confrontation of ideas, you know, between sort of the Western ideas and the Chinese Eastern idea, because backing all of that, of course, is the political system. One is a democracy, one man, one vote, and I think we all agree that that moves slower, but with more checks and balances. The other system is more authoritarian, you know, therefore you can move faster. Witness the speed, which many speakers have talked about, with which China, you know, came into the world in the last 30, 40 years. You know, nothing like that, and you know, I have many friends in India. I appreciate the comments. You know, a lot of my friends saying that, you know, China can move faster because the government is so authoritarian. We're the world's largest democracy. That's why we have to move slower. So I think so. The only word I'd like to share with everyone here is the idea of speed. If the world slows down, I'm sure all these systems could be worked out properly. But if the world keeps speeding and the rate of acceleration is getting higher, okay, all our systems start to fall apart, including the Bretton Woods agreements that were put together after the war, including the WTO. Look at how long it takes the WTO to do anything. That's why people are saying that WTO is obsolete. Being a multilateralist myself, and my brother especially, you know, that's a heartbreaking thing to hear, but it's the truth. You know, when was the last time we had a successful round? And the world is taking too long. The world is moving in nanoseconds. You know, the world is moving at the speed of light. And all the regulation and the institutions that work these regulations and laws is moving too slowly. And therefore, some countries are saying that, no, we've got to participate directly. And I see that maybe a little differently, but I actually see that very much on the ground, is that it's true. You know, I mean, we're talking about, you know, regulation not keeping up with the pace of change. And, you know, and I talk to people like, you know, I talked to Jeff Bezos, you know, he was also Princeton, you know, it's the old boys club here, okay, you know, and he's saying that, look at the way he's moved to control the market, and after somebody like that controls the market, he says, great, bring in the regulations now and keep all the competitors from going after me, right? That's one of the problems we're facing, very much on the ground now. You know, that's one of the problems. So I think I've taken more than enough time. Thank you.
No, you're most welcome. Thank you, William, for a very good intervention. But before I'd like to jump around a little bit because I think you raised a variety of issues that we should come back to. But let me just take off from the question of speed, right? Which you emphasized quite a bit. And okay, you are in fintech. Speed is everything. That's how you make it. So he's asking you to slow down.
I'm not asking you to slow down. The world is asking.
So that the regulators
and the regulators can catch up.
And we all know getting regulations in place need consensus among very different conflicting groups, and that is very difficult. Now, tell us about fintech, the future of financing, how you're financing all this economic activity, and you're going at such warp speed.
Okay.
What does that mean? What should we buckle ourselves?
Okay, thank you. So I'm not a Princeton graduate. And
You're lucky.
I am a finance guy. I've been always in a financial business. I started from Salomon Brothers, Goldman Sachs, trading, fixed income derivatives and many things, distressed asset, so forth. And I created my company, Monex. It's a brokerage company. It's a global brokerage company, letting customers to trade equity, futures, FX, all kind of things. Recently, I acquired a cryptocurrency exchange, one of the largest in the world. So I started from the kind of, the traditional financial business, now moving into moved into online trading, and then moved into crypto. Because internet, when internet was coming, I thought that it would really revolutionize the way the business to be conducted. Now the blockchain, cryptocurrency or blockchain is coming, and that I believe is going to change many things. So now we are in. You talked about the speed. Those in the fintech or crypto or blockchain, those areas, it's developed, handled, operated by digital engineers. And they are like athletes or musicians. What I mean by that is that, if you write a novel at the age of 18, you would never get the Nobel Prize for literature. But if you're a good athlete or good musician, at the age of 18, you can be the world #1. And the digital engineer, the same thing. When we talk about the traditional engineering, like create a gasoline engine, for example, it takes decades of accumulation of technologies and experience. But when we talk about the digital engineering, the guy who is talented and working hard, it can be the world #1. So the rule of the speed, or usually we don't see something new and strong coming up so quickly. But these days, those digital engineers create a new technologies. So it comes from all kind of direction, and then so quickly. And you don't see coming from your, hierarchical organization. Those things come from anywhere. So that is really changing the rule, I think. Another thing is that, in the internet, we don't have any country regulating, setting the rule for internet. Internet is set by, the ICANN or IAB or IEEE or IATF or, those are, multinational, global, kind of private sector, academias and, researchers and those people setting the rules. The blockchain and the crypto, I think it's going to be the same case. Currently, it's in the United States or Japan or EU or China or everybody kind of competing how to regulate cryptocurrency or blockchain. But it's not naturally, it's not fitted to be regulated by a particular country. So it will become the more, democratic, the private sector global rule setting. And that again, is going to really change the rule for all those technologies. The one thing very big about this, what's coming from this blockchain crypto is that, even in the internet technology, when you trade, there's a physical commodity, physical product moves around, and then you pay money through banks. So the nation always grasps what kind of money is moving. It's going through the domestic banks, go to corresponding bank, and then go to the domestic bank. Even you use a credit card, it always goes through banks. So it is always captured. The crypto, like if it's Bitcoin or whatever, from C2C or B2B or whatever, cross-border, it just goes direct without going through bank system, without going through SWIFT or corresponding bank. Just go direct. And the nations or the people won't see what is really happening in the money side. And this is a big thing. And you may say that, cryptocurrency, it can move around 10% a day. How come you can use it for settlement? You're right. But the people are now developing the so-called stable coin, whereby it's a cryptocurrency, but no volatility. It's pegged to dollar or pegged to yen or pegged to SDR, special drawing rights. So those are stable cryptocurrencies are coming up, and people may start using them. And then nations will lose ability to grasp what's going on. So this is a big issue. Nations will lose capacity to tax, the consumption tax or trade tax or whatever. So this is a very big issue. And again, all those rules may be regulated or created not by nations, but by more like global private organizations going forward. So I don't know the answer, but this is going to be very impacting to the worldwide trade or economy. One thing, by the way, is I said about a corresponding bank. When you pay to the cross-border to the different country, the money, it goes through corresponding bank. Do you know how much they make per year? Not on the FX spread, just the corresponding fee per year globally.
Tell me, I'm paying it, right?
Yeah, you're paying it. 200 billion US dollars a year.
Yeah.
Okay, just for corresponding fee.
Yeah.
It takes like 3 days. You never get assurance if it really get there. Okay? And then they take $200 billion. Yeah. So, there's a crypto blockchain technology will change many things, but we don't know how it is going to be regulated. And also, it will be done by very young people quickly. So we have to be paying a lot of attention, I think.
But just to follow up, you see, since our objective is trying to get at some framework for multilateralism to work. Now, what you are describing in this cryptocurrency is trying to find order among communities of private groups that are everywhere in the world, very smart digital engineers and all kinds of people. That sounds like anarchy. Anarchy does not, we created the state, the rules, to get out of this anarchistic state. Now, the thing is, do you think this is possible? I mean, we don't know whether it is possible, but what are your hunches? Can you set rules by people who ultimately cannot be held accountable?
Well, internet is anarchy.
Anarchy, yes.
So now, as you said, the problem is now it's not only internet, it's now money.
Money, yes.
Is in there, right? So you may know that many nations are now developing their own version of a cryptocurrency. It's called national digital cash to try to compete with those anarchy groups. But we don't know yet what will happen.
Yeah, I guess the emergence of the modern social contracted state had to get rid of absolutist monarchies. That's pretty tough process. It's not bloodless. But let me come back, the guru, Michael. In this whole, let me come back to the world, obviously, all this fintech and cryptocurrency is going to be, if it emerges, it could be quite disruptive to what any bankers here? Oh, that'd be gone, All your 200 billion fees is gone, right? This is very disruptive. Yeah, but it could create a new order. But the process is it's economic process, it's technological, but it's also a political process, people reacting to this.
Yeah.
How would nation states respond to all this? It will trample. And the thing is, these guys, if one nation is very, very non-benign towards such activity, you can go to another nation, right? You can shop around, and that is why it is so threatening to existing structures. You can move around. It's now in this world, how can we get to some form of an agreement? Who are we talking to? Are we in the old days, is nation states talk to each other. Now, you're not nation states. It's all these NGOs and community. Now, how is that dialogue going to be constructed? Any thoughts?
Well, I think there's tensions in this. I mean, look, this is early days, so nobody knows the answers. But so one of the questions I've asked myself is, if the cryptocurrencies kind of sneak through the internet, and they don't generate a whole lot of data, right? Because you're not supposed to have it. I mean, it's there, but it's not in somebody's database.
Nobody collects it.
And then the things I adverted to briefly at the end of my talk this morning, I mean, those are things that are enabled by large pools of data, right? It's just a different set of technologies. It's the platform, it's the mobile payment system, and so on. And so I can imagine people sort of putting a high priority on privacy and preferring the cryptocurrencies if they're stable enough in terms of a store of value, even if it's just for a short period of time. But I can imagine them also going the other way and saying, I don't mind if the data is protected, and I'd really like to have a credit score because I can't get credit in any other way, right? And so I don't know how that's going to come out. I mean, but they sure go in different directions, as best I can tell, from from kind of what I know about it. As to nation states, I mean, take China. The People's Bank of China so far has expressed some considerable skepticism about, cryptocurrencies. And they probably control the boundaries of the internet, so you can't sneak in, right? And surreptitiously.
Firewalls.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that may be kind of unique. A lot of the early supporters of cryptocurrency were sort of libertarians. People whose fundamental philosophy is we want governments and government-like institutions out of the business of kind of facilitating things and watching. But I was very struck by Oki's comment. One of the things that is happening in the world is disintermediation, just because people are collecting fees that are, at least given modern technology, just outrageous. So I think it's going to be very hard to resist, the development of those things because they just deliver a benefit, disintermediation.
Well, one more thing is, we were chatting earlier. This year, 2018, happens to be the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I.
Right.
All right. And what World War I, the history I learned about World War I is it changed no boundaries in Western Europe. Everyone having fought a bloody war, no border lines were redrawn. And yet that is not just that's only the Western Europe. But if you go to Central and Eastern Europe, 4 empires collapsed, right? The Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and also the German Empire, and which would be revitalized in a different form in World War II. And after World War II, the world tried to find rules, multilateral institutionalized rules to prevent these types of conflict happening. Right? And it was spearheaded by nation states, mainly the victorious powers. Not all of them saw eye to eye, and there was a dominant power, the American nation state and economic power that pretty much had a very important role to set the free liberal economic order that we had for globalization. Now there is a lot of internal conflict because of rapid globalization, not to mention fintech that might have very shocking effects gradually over the system. And the outcome is that the conflict, could it be contained by nation states? Because these are the formal setups, these are multilateral. We're trying to talk about setting up a multilateral framework for the future. Should the people be talking to each other? Can we gradually create regional pacts among nation states? We have to deal with people who are not in government, and they are also international, environmental groups, human rights groups that have a big say, big impact. They can all mobilize. Some call them terrorists, but that's a matter of opinion. How do we see, and it's not limited to Michael, that the current trade war that the U.S. President Trump has put up, do you think this will actually improve our awareness of how to deal with this problem, or will it distract the attempt? Because TPP was on course, and then it looks like it's a bit, the U.S. is not part of it. It's not derailed, but Japan is holding it up, but the U.S. is not part. Is this going to be more difficult to get to a nation-state agreed multilateral framework that Victor had also talked about, from being regional pacts, but they are reasonably open? William?
Well, I can try to take a stab at this. I think there will the big change in my mind about the post-war world, where, as you said, America was the dominant power, and they created what we would call Pax Americana, and this multilateral system, in order to promote reconstruction after the war, and also to promote political harmony. However, I think what the big step that has been taken now is that has worked very well to the extent that it's raised so many developing countries, especially China, to the level now where there's actually competition for who is the dominant power. And maybe the new reality that we have to adjust ourselves to, and perhaps the America has to adjust to, is that we will not be a unipolar world where there's one dominant power, but there will be several, amongst equals. They still be the first amongst equals, but there will be several dominant powers who could create a new multilateral system, because all the other smaller states would basically benefit if there is stability in the world, and there has been. And historically, we've shown the wealth creation, everything has shown that. But we're now going to a multipolar world where you've got to have maybe 2 or 3, 4, 5 leading horses that could agree amongst themselves and say, this is the new system. And I think that's very hard. Because what has happened, what we see is actually the other way, that people are still looking at it as a zero-sum game, that the polarization within the domestic political systems, as Sam talked about in America, is leading to this sort of nationalism. People are saying America first, and it's very hard for them to say that, what about first amongst equals? I think a lot of speakers, given that we're all idealists in our own way, are saying that, sure, you've got to have this multipolar world where people compete on some things and they cooperate on other things. And one of the things they probably need to cooperate on is the multilateral trade system, at least. And don't forget, we're really talking about a very insignificant part of what's happening in the overall picture. Because we're talking, for example, the trade tariffs only talking about trade in products. They don't even talk about trade in services. Right. They don't even talk about, there's so many parts of it, they really don't talk much about investments, although that's taken care of by other vetting mechanisms. But the reality still is that I think if the world comes to the realization that we live now in perhaps a more multipolar world instead of a unipolar world, then maybe this group can get together and do it for the whole world and reconstruct the WTOs of this world and revamp all the Bretton Woods type of institutions so that it is fit for purpose in the new world. But I'm still concerned that this process would not be fast enough, given what you just said, the speed.
The disruption that will happen.
Because the next thing is that the whole financial system is disrupted again, and it keeps going. People are saying that the outsourcing of labor-intensive production and the globalization of production in the world has led to this bad name for globalization, at least for the developed countries who lost jobs. They haven't seen anything yet. That was slow. That took like 50 years. That took 50 years. Now you're talking about 5 years. You could be totally disrupted in an arena like the finance, and the impact is by far greater. And we all know that, whatever physical trade you're talking about, the financial thing that wraps around it, the financial market that wraps around it is many, many times bigger in terms of impact. If you look at how much corn, how much cotton is actually shipped from country to country, and you look at all the financial instruments that go around corn futures and cotton futures and so on, it's not even a comparison. So I'm stuck in this sort of physical world, and it's a small thing. That's why I started off my introductory remarks by saying that it's not about trade and it's not about the shipment of automobiles around the world. It's actually something much, much bigger.
Mm-hmm. But basically, with the kind of communications and technological revolution that is happening, production is just going to be global, relocated, and by nature disruptive of both the host and the originator of that investment. It's almost inevitable. Next, the question is, the rise of populism is that the people find this very troubling. I think this is no different from the 19th century. When you had industrialization, the workers found it very troubling. Now it just so happens today, the people are actually in the rich nations, they find it more troubling than those in the poorer countries who are trying to attract investors to come. Now, wouldn't this attempt to restructure the world's multilateral trade framework have to address the concerns of those who feel insecure? It's not poverty, it's not inequality, it's just insecurity in the face of such disruption. A lot of it is. Right? And if you need to structure incentives to make people feel secure, there are very few choices other than the nation state. I mean, who else will protect you, right? I mean, insurance markets don't exactly deal with those problems. So the nation state has to be there to provide it, but for populism is on the rise. Unless we can address the insecurities of all these people out there, they will derail whatever deals you would want to make in that multilateral. And that means nation states and business would have to face up to social responsibility, for lack of a better term, right? And the social responsibility in another nation. I mean, it's not only your own people, but you got to empathize with guys in another country. This is a whole lot more, magnanimous that's being required, not your own community. You think that there are steps that are being taken towards this? How can we do this?
Well, it isn't easy. I mean, I think.
Thank you.
No, I wanted to say a couple of things because I agree with William. First of all, I don't think the speed thing is really important, and it's especially important now, right? I don't think you can keep up. I mean, so I just think you have to accept that you'll get periods when, the change in the technologies and business models and practices outrun the whatever regulatory apparatus or structure and rules that surrounds this, and then you just play catch up. But I haven't been able to think of an answer to that. But I think there's two things happening, that from my point of view, that don't necessarily mean you can't reach agreement, but it makes it complicated. One of them is, this is the way Danny Roderick describes it, is a pretty important now commentator on this, He said in the period when the successive rounds of the GATT were negotiated, the fundamental idea was that they completed the round because the majority of the countries who were making most of the decisions decided A, it was beneficial in general, and B, you know, it passed a test based in part on experience that it was good for everybody, right? I mean, it's a bit of an exaggeration, and at some point, according to Danny, right around the time the WTO came into existence, this multilateral system became sacrosanct, right? And so then the idea was, no, you don't get to fiddle with that, right? You don't get to modify it, you don't get to cheat. So if you've got a distributional problem, you know, or some other challenge internally, you have to solve it in another way. Mm-hmm. And what Danny's saying is what's the nationalists one way of looking at what they're doing is they're pulling it back, you know, in the direction of the earlier period. Mm-hmm. And the adverse trends in distributional terms are about 30 years old, maybe a little more, I mean, according to the research that's been done. So it may not be surprising that that's where we ran into trouble. Mm-hmm. I think the challenge is to have a rules-based system, because without rules, you don't have anything, right? A rules-based system that has more flexibility in it than the one that we have created for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And you know, this isn't a novel idea. If you watch the behavior of developing countries, both in the negotiations and in the way they actually behave, they can't live with rigid rules because sometimes they don't serve you well. I mean, India has, you know, been criticized over and over again for saying, yeah, but there's got to be exceptions to this if we run into real trouble. So I think the big challenge is in part to have a rules-based system where there's enough structure so that if you're not sort of obeying the rules, then there's some structure that allows you to explain why. Mm-hmm. But let me just say one other thing about this. I remember, you know, a period of time, it was about 10 years ago, when development types would go to India and say, you know what, the retail system here is pretty inefficient. So you should let Carrefour and Walmart in. They'll clean it up. Mm-hmm. And the Indian policymakers said, what? You know, there's sort of, I have several tens of millions of people working in that sector. We don't want to clean it up like tomorrow, right? We want, and developing countries do this all the time. China's done, every single country I've ever been in does it. They open up at a pace that's consistent with their ability to absorb the shock, right?
Yeah.
Well, rules don't do that. Okay, so what I'm really trying to say with that example is you need an augmented system where the rule structure is more sophisticated and the serious policymakers then have the flexibility to control the environment through their own policy choices so they get good outcomes. Yeah. I don't know if you...
Well, you know, I think what you're saying for me, in my simple mind, falls under something called the infant industry argument. Yeah. In fact, you can look at China 2025, the same thing. You know, what the developing countries are saying is that if you don't allow me breathing space to catch up, all the multinationals come in and take over my economy. So that's why there's infant industry arguments about protecting your auto industry. There's infant industry arguments about protecting the internet-based things. You know, and I think that's really what we're experiencing. And basically the incumbent, you know, strong city-states are saying no. You know, you got to open up. You got to open up your financial markets. You got to open up your investment markets. You know, and the developing countries are saying no. The country I'm governing, my people will not allow that. They cannot absorb that shock. So it comes back to that. I mean, there's so many things flying around. You know, from my point of view, this whole argument about 2025. You know, Germany has something called Industry 4.0, which is the same thing. America has its own policies about the industry. Everybody wants to be in the industries of the future, you know. So I mean, so it really comes down to, again, you know, I think the key thing for me though is maybe my second point, other than the speed point, which is that maybe if the world accepts a multipolar world, you know, and it's not all zero-sum game on every field, then you get a situation where, okay, I'll cooperate with you on this area, let's say, you know, global warming, and I'll compete with you like crazy on making cars or driverless cars, you know, and just accept it. But I think what's happening though, unfortunately, Sam, is that your government has put everything together. You know, sort of like if you don't let me do, if you don't stop your autonomous driving, I'm going to do this to you in the political arena or the military arena. You know, I think that one of the big things I also see happening in the world is that the world used to have rules about, you know, you compete in which arena and you confine your retaliation to that arena. Now the retaliation is all over the place. You know, I mean, that one of the biggest problems I heard this earlier from some of the panelists is the idea of trust. If you can't trust the people you're either trying to build a new system with or competing with, how can you have any kind of agreement? You know, if you agree to, let's say Xi Jinping and Donald Trump has a great dinner at the end of this month, and they say, okay, no tariffs for the moment. What's to stop a year later? Well, America's saying, hey, you have too many bases in South China Sea, therefore the tariffs are back on, or you're not doing enough to help with North Korea, and the tariffs are back on. That's the problem. You know, the arena, it's all been mixed up. Whereas in the old days, you retaliate if you didn't like somebody's dumping, you go to WTO, you retaliate with tariffs. Okay, but you don't retaliate the political or the other spheres.
It goes to something like commitment. When you had a hegemon, the commitment is credible. In a multipolar world, it's complicated.
It's much more
to say the least. Right? That's right. But let me ask, before we leave and open up to the audience, one last question, okay, is that do you actually think fintech can ever be used to actually put money directly into poor people? Transfer that is very efficient, right? You know, nowadays we go through a lot of intermediaries that actually is a very expensive just to give aid. Giving aid is very complicated. Foreign aid, transfers within countries. Is there a, you know, how can fintech really do it? That might also help, you know, to make it cheaper way to make people who are insecure actually feel security.
Yeah, of course. If you know, World Bank or Gates Foundation or whoever wants to give aid to people in Africa, in one country, they put money into the government, and the money will be stolen by the government, right? So those aid doesn't get to the destination. So you could pay, you could transfer digital cash into smartphones. In some of the countries in Africa, you know, they don't have a bank accounts. Maybe like 5% of people have bank accounts, but everybody has got smartphones because otherwise they cannot communicate, they cannot get a job. So they have smartphones. So we can inject cash into phones. And then maybe bad guys would come around and say, give me your phone. Okay, and steal money. Okay? But if you design the cryptocurrency using blockchain, smart contract, you can design the money whereby that money can only be used by me, or that money can only be used by only be used to buy milk or food, not to buy guns. So the cryptocurrency technology is it's got a very high potential in applications to make money much better form, especially for like the giving aid. It's just beautiful. So there are many the possibilities. But the one thing is that while the regional discussion or developed versus developing are very important, in this digital world, okay, if someone buys digital contents, not only digital contents, but also these days with a 3D printer, you get a program, you can make many things. It is digital, okay? buying something digital, paying in digital money. And then, again, nations won't grasp it. Nations won't see it. Okay? And I would say that, not that a nation state, but it is possible the people in this digital world try to come up with a multilateral kind of agreement, how much we should reserve money, like tax, to pay for society. So that kind of discussion may happen actually earlier than the national states sit on the table to talk about this. Okay? And also, those are digital guys. They are very powerful. They can hack anything. I mean, these days, even Facebook, the one who's supposed to be the most technology advanced company, they got hacked. The banks, SWIFT, central bank, they got hacked. Okay? All data is exposed to the risk of being hacked. And the blockchain technology is probably much better solution than servers to protect those security. And again, you can't keep those digital guys kind of, they are kind of dangerous or anarchy, blah, blah, blah. You have to really embrace them for the discussion.
Yes.
I think that's the way to go.
Yes, good. I mean, maybe the new technology, the digital, they can come up with solutions that could be embraced by a much wider community. Great.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, let's open up the session. Thank you very much. I see people eager to inject into the conversation. Yes, please. Lady in the front.
Thank you very much. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I wanted to bring the issue of inequality, because this is, in a sense, not the normal type of inequality, but it's highly extreme and is very concentrated. And it's driven not so much through work, not so much through labor, but through finance. And therefore, the issue of governance and the setting of the ground rules in that type of a context, including in the redefining of the new multilateralism, who set the rules and how and what type of rules. And even though we think that today it's our nation states, but if you look at how the nation states are actually being governed, so the issue of governance and who drive the type of rules, you see the lobby groups, you see all kinds of different interest groups influencing the social contract, right? And for a particular group. And this is how the insecurity and the social divides, if you like, get kind of concentrated. What I'm trying to stress is that I think it's time for us to think of how we can set the new multilateralism by whom, what type, but within the context that we already know that is needed in the new global economy, which is the need for inclusiveness and the need for sustainability. And I think that the new economy, in a sense, is shaped by the Sustainable Development Agenda that all our states actually agreed to in 2015. And that brings together not just the economy, but the coming together of the economy, society, as well as our ecosystems. And I think that in a sense, who would be driving that agenda, what type of values and rules, given the type of disruptions that we have, and even the ethics, the type of ethics that will drive this new system.
Thank you. Anyone want to respond? Or, well, it was not a question, so we don't have to answer. That's good.
No, I mean, that's a really good question. Let's take climate change. I think that's a good example of one where, it's urgent. It's an existential question. And I think one of the things we've learned is that there isn't a single answer to the question, who needs to do it? That is, I can't imagine, dealing effectively with this problem without some top-down policies. I just did something this morning I almost never do, which is agreed to sign a letter. I almost never sign group letters. I always think, maybe if you've got something to say it yourself. But this one had to do with climate change and having a carbon tax, you know, which is what Bill Nordhaus got the Nobel Prize for this year. But that's not sufficient. You need, you know, changes in values, you need awareness, you need the corporate sector fully engaged, you need a whole lot of things. So I think on the most challenging problems that we face, how to adapt our system, how to deal with something as big as climate change, but I don't think inequality is all that different. The answer to the question, it's a little, you know, I don't mean to be flippant, but is a very large group of people and institutions in different categories. No, I mean, that would be my answer anyway. Not, you know, not something simple like the UN. Not to be critical of your long time.
Yeah, that's an important point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, the gentleman here, and then the lady there. Okay. In the front here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to comment on this. I want to pick up a point that Mr. Fung raised that I thought was a very excellent one, and one that I've been thinking a lot about, having previously worked in the US government in the Obama administration. And that's the linkage, and whether there should be a linkage between the economic and the national security part. And your very poignant, you know, example of Section 301 is what the Trump administration is using for tariffs based on national security. And in the existing multilateral system, there were carve-outs around both on the trade side and even on some of the investment issues. I worked on CFIUS, and for those sort of carve-outs. But there is now a blurring, and there were conversations between U.S. and China around these definitions, and there was disagreements around what these terms meant and whether economic was part of national security. Is there a way, like if you were to draw that line, right, in this new multilateral world, what are the four corners of how would you define what parts, if any parts of economics should be in national security and where that threshold would be?
You know, I think you're raising a question that all regulators or people drawing up rules, just rules, have faced, and that there are carve-outs. You know, we talk about infant industry carve-out. Security is another carve-out, right? It's legitimate because some things probably do, you know, impinge on security. In fact, one of my biggest takeaways, you know, from I think Sam talked about last night, so is really that security is looming bigger now. It's not economic benefit, it's security. But security is now, people define security in different ways. You know, does having a strong competitor in a technology, is that national security, or is it just holding down a competitor, you know, a competitive nation? You know, so the problem is that in a polarized world, which is where we're getting to, and it comes down to the inequalities generated by this rapid shift. Globalization probably played a part. I think technology, displacement by technology plays another huge part. People are insecure, they cannot cope, and therefore politically they become polarized. And that led to the rise of, if you're kind, you call it nationalism, if you're unkind, you call it populism. Okay, and that's how political people who have political say is elected under the Western democratic system. And therefore they will be swayed by using all these arguments. I mean, I lived through 30 years where protectionism, you know, is just another word. You know, it's really what they're doing is protectionist by saying that, okay, you got to have certain labor laws in the countries, you got to pay them a certain amount. People hijack these rules. I mean, there's probably no basis, for example, for global rationalization of labor if you all paid the same. But you know, some of the unions would say that, well, you know, we can't compete with them. They paid a tenth we are, so they've got to have a minimum wage like this, and they've got to have freedom of association like this, and so on. So I mean, we live through all that, but that's always true. There's always a need, and then it's how they're used. You know, and I think that's why I think, you know, coming back to Lean's point, it is so hard to craft something that satisfies even nation states. But I think the bigger picture I'm hearing is that you now have something that transcends nation state. You have groupings of people that are multinational, who have the same, in fact, they may feel more affinity for each other than the people living in the same geographical, nation state by definition is a geographical construct. And now you have cyberspace, which took away all boundaries, which means you now have groups of people who could be living anywhere in the world, but they think alike, they want to be grouped together, they are a force for change in the world. I mean, I think we talk about really deep stuff. And unfortunately, I'm just a business guy, so I want to go back down to, what am I going to do in January when the 25% tariff comes in? Where am I shifting the production? But we are seeing very much on the ground now, for those who are interested, there's going to be a diaspora of production out of China. Just like there was during the, when China first opened up, there was a big sucking sound, of all the production jobs going to China. I think there's going to be now things coming out of China. In fact, China itself, if you look at from my perspective, ever since the 12th Five-Year Plan, China actually publicly stated that we don't want these kinds of labor-intensive, low-value-added industries, and they should be, somebody else should do it. And that could be part of their Belt and Road strategy as well, as creating bases for their people to take that production elsewhere. But I actually see it as a benefit for a lot of developing countries. Sure. That China, while it relinquishes that, is going to let that production run to other countries. And not only that, there's a double thing, because not only will they relinquish the production they used to ship to America and Europe to other countries, but their own domestic market is growing so rapidly. They say that, here, look, we also have another big market here. In fact, I just came from, I think the chief executive mentioned the CIIE, where basically China International Import Expo, where they say that, hey, we welcome trade. I don't know how much of that is just juxtaposing themselves against America, but for sure, China and Asia consumption is becoming another big market. So developing countries and the countries that really need this, don't forget, a lot of these industries, no matter what we call them, they are the first rung up the industrialization ladder when economies move from an agricultural economy to a manufacturing and industrial economy. And they would welcome that. They welcome it in Africa. They welcome it in many parts of the developing world. And I think that's a good thing. So out of every crisis, there's also good and bad. And to the extent that if America really stops trade with China by putting the whole $500 billion, under high tariff, they have to buy it from somewhere else, and that largesse will go to other supplying nations. And that's good. It's a good thing for the world.
Lady over there, yeah.
Could I just?
Yeah, you want to answer?
My view is that technology moves, and so how you deal with it has to move with it, that there's no fixed right answer. And my sense is now, just to go back to the kind of first question you asked, my sense now is that this dual use, if you use an old term, has become more important again. I mean, the government and the defense establishment always has an important role because of this upstream research. So that's kind of a permanent feature. And China knows this. They're pouring vast amounts of money into what we would call the upstream part of the research process. But downstream, I think you just have to kind of adjust with the times. And what strikes me now is the frontiers of AI are being pushed by basically commercial companies, and that's one of the critical national security technologies. So we got to deal with it, right? Now, so I think, that's a perfectly legitimate argument. And as you know better than I, CFIUS was strengthened by congressional legislation this summer, probably in response to this. There's also a criticism that I think the Trump administration is overusing the national security argument, when they don't really mean it, that it's something else. I mean, we talk about trade all the time. I have to tell you, I think the main event is technology and investment, because investment determines where jobs are, right, incrementally, right? And technology is, this thing that helps you grow. People have said it this morning. So trade, in some sense, is a smokescreen for what's really going on behind it. Sorry.
Yeah, very good. Yes, please.
Hi, Bernice Lee. I'm from Chatham House, and I'm really, really encouraged to hear the panel, in a way, talk like a developing country back in the 90s about the spaces for development policy. If indeed what you said, that multilateralism has become a shibboleth and therefore became rigid in the last 15 years. I think this is really now the opportunity to rethink what rules should mean. And in some ways, I suspect that things like fintech and cryptocurrencies are the kind of opportunity for us to rethink, for example, the boundaries between the formal and the informal economy, which we have kind of ignored. What is legal, illicit, and illegal, also pretty much ignored. And in some ways, I feel that if we don't grab this opportunity to use technologies, and in some ways embed in the smart contracts that Oki is talking about, with either taxation or other forms of rules in mind, then perhaps we will be missing a great chance. I'm really encouraged recently to see, I don't know whether you've seen Unilever and Marks and Spencer's in the UK, they're using blockchain to verify performance of their suppliers. And with that verification, Barclays and I think not HSBC, Barclays and Standard Chartered are providing better loans for the small farmers and for small producers via these supply chains. So I can see how blockchain could really help in many different ways for transfer. But unless we sort out the problem that Oki pointed out, how do we tackle the taxation question, the question of transfer and accountability, I think we will miss this opportunity to use new technologies to reshape multilateralism in a really different way that we hadn't anticipated before.
You know that the many large financial institutions, like in the States, they have been really kind of talking negatively on the crypto and blockchain. Not blockchain, but the crypto. But they are the ones who's got the most number of patents on the cryptocurrency and the blockchain. So they're really studying, researching very hard, and which I believe they are trying to understand things, and they try to kind of, walk closer to the other side of the community. So I'd like to remain more optimistic that there will be some good discussion, and we have more general rules.
Yeah, but I have to say, blockchain sounds, I've learned a lot from this as a great way to make, to deliver stuff, including money, securely. But the last thing you need in the informal economy is anonymity, right? That was the problem rather than the solution. So there really is a tension here. And I think we need a mix of things that give people an identity and a track record so that they can participate, get credit and other things, which is kind of the antithesis of this, but then use these things for their right purpose, which is prevent people from stealing 3/4 of it on the way through the delivery system and whatnot. We'll experiment our way through to good solutions, I think. Sorry.
My question will continue on the blockchain topic, and it's to Mr. Matsumoto. As you know, China has invested heavily in our blockchain R&D. Just over the last 2 years, $3.5 billion have been invested in R&D. And Nanjing alone opened a fund last year with $1.5 billion looking directly at blockchain solutions. So, but as you know, blockchain not only disrupts financial sector, but it has implications across many sectors. So I was interested to know what your thoughts are on blockchain's role in government and public institutions and how it's currently already disrupting how voting systems. So for example, one city in Japan already has used blockchain in its voting system, and there are countries that are looking at it as for voting systems. So how do you think blockchain will disrupt political and government institutions?
Wow. I think it's not a question of technology. I think it's a question of a kind of agreement, what a society wants to do. The blockchain is basically a database technology. And today, why nations keep the power? Because they have data. They have pension data, they have land certificate, they have ID, they have all data of people, right? So they can tax, and they can control people. But all those, the data can be stored in blockchain. And it may be safer, and it may be also more convenient because you keep your node to your data. So you can always review that, such and such. So that could that can change our lives potentially much better, and the cost can be much smaller. But it can be done at the cost of the nations losing power. And do we want to do that? So I think how the blockchain can be used for the various part is really kind of agreement, kind of it has to be agreed by incumbent and the disruptor where we want to design the new world or new society to be. So answering your question, I don't think we know yet. But the one thing is, you said the one thing very interesting that China making a lot of investment. This area, blockchain or cyber, some nations are making huge investment, right? Like Russia. When you look at the national defense budget of Russia, it's huge. But you don't see that new tanks, new ships, new MiG, or even new Soyuz being made. Where does money went? It went to cyber, right? So cyber it's a land, marine, sky, space, and cyber. It's a fifth domain, but it's huge. And then it's not all nations making investment into cyber. Just the nations who are making wars are making investment into those areas. So we have to be careful where those technologies are made and how to use that. We have to be, I think, more careful and we should pay more attention what's happening in the cyberspace globally.
So I want to ask about, because technology actually is something good, but I want to ask something about cybersecurity. Initially, Dr. Fung talked about technology is something new and law is lagging. And versus for the exchanges, there are so many news about the coin exchange got hacked, and there are like billions of dollars got hacked. And honestly, just like last night when I talked to my mom, when she set the iPhone password as 1111, then I see that the risk from cybersecurity is increasing while the law may not be protect human being, general public like us. So my question is to the exchange owner as well as the business boss, how would you see the threat from cybersecurity because of the advancing technology?
What is the question?
Cybersecurity.
Yeah. What do you see the threat of cybersecurity?
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
You should know that all of your data is exposed. And then you may wake up next morning that all of your bank account is
Gone.
Seriously, it could happen. The thing is that after the GFC, around that time, connectivity, to the network really grew. And offense technology, it really went up. But the cyber defense technology or expertise didn't grow as much as the connectivity or offense side grew. There's a huge gap. And again, it's only like the States, Israel, Russia, China, North Korea, could be Iran, who are really deep in that area. So I think there's a huge gap. With or without, we know that. So we have to, and again, the one potential solution for that is a blockchain. Data stored in the servers can be hacked. Data stored in blockchain may be much safer because people you get your node. So this entire cybersecurity issue is something it should be more informed to people. And as a society, we should collectively think about what to deal with it. It is very scary level right now.
I think I'll even go scarier than this. Don't forget, there's something that Sam taught me, is the weaponization, of cyber and internet. So many things are now controlled, through that. What if a terrorist opens up the sluice gates of a dam What if they totally disrupt your power supply? I mean, it is really scary. And what's quite interesting, you're saying that perhaps blockchain is the solution to that security issue. I think that obviously needs to be discussed. One thing I would like to just make a general statement against bringing things down to earth to my level is that, we're all talking about technology. One thing I like to caution everyone is that these are all technological tools that can be used for good, for bad, in many industries and many things. I was always reminded of a statement that my brother made that, when the internet came in, a lot of people set up sort of e-commerce departments. I mean, internet is used for everything. Just like when the fax machines first came in, Lee and Fung did not set up a fax division to work fax. So I mean, you've got to understand these technological disruptions are tools that can be used for multi-purposes, for good, for bad, for change the way things are done, to disrupt existing methods of doing things, to disintermediate existing intermediaries. And unfortunately, that rate of change is accelerating. I still come back to the speed issue. It's very hard. I feel sorry. I even feel sorry for Kathy, believe it or not. The data got hacked, and now everybody says, pay me. That doesn't solve the problem. Just paying you for for losing that data. It doesn't solve the problem. The problem is that, maybe the problem is storing data differently and not making. I'll just share, if I have a little bit of time, just share something with you. It's the mentality of people have to cybersecurity that's scary. I serve on the board of a company, okay? It got hacked. It lost the names of the customers and so on. And unlike in many cases, we actually found the culprit. It was some kid in England who boasted on Facebook that he hacked into this company and got the data. That's the only reason we found him. Otherwise, we couldn't find him. And the board all said, great, now let's go after him. And the word that came back was that, don't even think about going after this guy. If you ever charge him or put him in jail, okay, you have the whole world of hackers now after you. Okay, you're not going to sleep at night because people don't even look at it as a crime, cybersecurity. They look at it as kids are having fun, they're hacking in, and it's really, I think the world has to come to grips with these new technologies, and how you, and unfortunately, we still talk about city-states, you still talk about regulation, you talked about tax. I mean, all these things come in, do you tax e-commerce? Instead of taxing 100 containers coming in with goods, what if there's 10,000 little parcels coming into your country, from different areas of the world? And how do you tax that? And is it efficient? And can you afford to tax those people? I mean, these are all problems we grapple with these technological advances.
Well, thank you, William.
I got to tell you, I think Cathay Pacific's problem was not the data breach. It was that they forgot to mention it for a few months. I'm serious. I think the ethics around this is actually quite important and needs to be thought about everywhere, including in the business world.
Well, I think we're running out of time. I see Peter has been patiently waiting to speak, so I think we should wrap it up. I think there are a couple of important messages we have come to, and that is the future multilateral framework is an agreement that will have to embrace a much larger community than just governments to participate. Solutions there, we might even have to imagine more innovative solutions, including blockchain technology, which will empower people, and yet we need rules. We need rules that people buy in, but are flexible enough to accommodate these very rapid technological speed changes, and regulations are more likely to be acceptable if more groups other than just governments participate. And then we might need technology to help us deliver solutions, deliver transfers of income, better targeted at lower cost, less intermediation, and it sounds like intermediaries are a bad term, but remember, trade rely on intermediaries. You know, you don't, people, you need to go through some structure, but the structure is under challenge at the moment. Well, thank you very much for your patience. I hope you have enjoyed the session, and thank the people.
Thank you.
Well then,
Thank you.